Thanks everyone for coming back to the next edition of Econ Talks. And Gareth, the rise of social housing needs is quite concerning across the country, and I think something that we've talked about in the past, but really does deserve a bit more of a focus. I was in Gisborne Tairāwhiti this last week, driving through no motel rooms to be found, which surprised me, and I sort of asked around, what big event was on, and was told that that was basically all emergency housing being utilised. And it highlighted to me very, very clearly just how much of a need we do have for additional housing. It's not that we're not building enough, and therefore people are seeing higher prices. It's that some people don't have a roof over their heads. And I know that you've done some analysis and discussions recently around that social housing problem. I mean, how bad is it?
It's just phenomenal the rate that the waiting list for those state houses has been going up. A couple of thousand over the course of the last quarter or so, and when you look back to 2015, the entire extent of the state house waiting list at that point in time was around about 3,500 people, and we're now talking upwards of over 10 to 12,000. So it really, and no end in sight in terms of how quickly that's going up. It's quite interesting when you delve into the sort of regional aspect of it. You mentioned Gisborne has been one area that's under a lot of pressure, and that has shown through in the numbers that we've been seeing. But you look through other parts of the North Island as well, through parts of central North Island, Palmerston North, Hawke's Bay, those areas also showing through in terms of real shortages coming through. And the interesting thing is when you think about those housing markets, they're not generally the ones where you'd say there's massive housing affordability issues, not when you compare them to the likes of Auckland, where you'd think that should be a big problem. Queenstown, a different kettle of fish, but obviously housing has been highly unaffordable down there as well. These are areas where housing is relatively affordable in the sort of modern New Zealand context of what we're looking at the moment. So our sort of understanding, or my understanding of how that's come about, is what we've seen is people in the urban areas have been forced to pay more for either to purchase a house or to rent in the main urban centres. That's forced people from the likes of Wellington, Auckland, and Hamilton to look further afield for their housing needs. And if they're employed, they can get a job and potentially drive for an hour to work if necessary. Say from Rotorua to Hamilton. But then that means that people who are less well off already in those more outlying areas, they're just not able to access housing because the supply isn't there, and the price has been bid up beyond what they can afford. So yeah, a really critical situation that we're seeing coming through in that housing state house area at the moment.
Absolutely, and like you highlight, basically people just getting pushed out and out and out. And at some point, there's nowhere further to go. People have put down their roots. Their kids might be at school. They need to stick around the area, and they might not well have a better proposition of where else to move to. And I think we need to highlight that this remains an issue. It's not like it's come up just because of COVID. And to be clear, I don't think it's come up because of any one government either. If you look at where those numbers starting to come from, it is sort of successive failures of actually being able to put a roof over a Kiwi's head, which is really a bit of a sad indictment on the country, but highlights as well the scale of need. And I know that at the budget this year, the government allocated money towards, I think, an additional 8,000 state housing units, and that was over the next 5 years. But I'm pretty sure that's not really going to cut the mustard when it comes to actually starting to solve this issue. It doesn't even really, get us too far along the track, let alone solve it, does it?
Well, no, when the waiting list is going up by 2,000 a quarter, you can see that 8,000 is going to be gobbled up in a year, and like you say, the government's going to be taking 4 or 5 years potentially to build those houses. So the problem's only going to get more critical. I mean, obviously, our economic outlook for 2021 is relatively pessimistic, and if you are seeing more job losses coming through as the economy softens, that is just going to further add to the pressure in terms of people's ability to afford housing, and I would expect that waiting list to grow further. So yeah, I think there has to be a lot more, big and critical action in that area. The government has obviously been distracted somewhat over the last 3 years or so with its Kiwi Build program, which, while they were obviously looking to address some of those housing issues and housing affordability issues, that hasn't occurred. And I don't think Kiwi Build was ever going to be the solution for that anyway. But yeah, a lot more building needs to be done in the short term, simply because you've got people who are not living in an inadequate housing situation, and something needs to be done to address those issues. At the same time, the government obviously needing to make big strides as well in terms of actually trying to solve what is causing those underlying housing affordability issues. We've talked about infrastructure and the costs associated with that. The government's talked about the Resource Management Act and how they want to repeal that and split it off into two acts to try and help around land zoning and the supply of housing as well. It's a very complicated situation. I don't think there's going to be one single thing that changes it. There's no silver bullet, as it were, but a lot more work needs to be done because this problem is really getting out of hand, and it was getting well out of hand before Labour was elected in 2017. It's just got worse from there.
Absolutely, and I think what you highlight there is that supply remains a key issue here. A lot of people, there's been a lot of finger pointing in the last few weeks about the housing crisis and issues. Is it first home buyers or investors that are making it worse? And really, I think that focuses a bit too much on the demand side stuff, which does have real importance, but is still somewhat limited. When the LVRs came in 2016, yep, they certainly took the heat out of the market for a bit, but house prices didn't drop anything considerable. Even the likes of a capital gains tax isn't going to change the housing market overnight. We saw the foreign buyers ban, which was going to fundamentally change things, did nothing. Funnily enough, is exactly what we said it would do. Not a real thing, and it highlights again that supply side issue. You're right. We need to have more infrastructure and larger scale infrastructure able to connect up these houses. Otherwise, developers are simply not going to go and be able to build because, well, they can't connect up. We need to have that RMA, thoroughly reformed and simplified, but also some of that back end work happening at councils needs to be streamlined so that actually it's not a hassle to go and build, because at the moment there is still quite a lot of struggle. You talk to people trying to develop, even in regional centres, they're being told what sort of colour the fence needs to be and what rocks can be where and how the trees have to look. I mean, all of those add cost and really do challenge people. So I think that's the key determinant, right, is that supply change. Now, it's not going to be a quick fix, but the longer we leave it before we start to address the issue, the more we're going to see those motels being booked out, the more Kiwis who are going to have a really, really tough position. And so, look, I think, that's a really big issue. COVID is huge, but has sort of just really quite quickly emerged on scene. This housing issue has been here for far, far longer.
Yeah, I think one of the concerns for me when you talk about suppliers, look, we've got dwelling consents going at 38,000 a year at the moment. It's the highest it's been in 45, 46 years. And still you've got housing where, affordability is a major issue. And it may well be in 12 or 24 months' time that if the housing market slows a little bit, that will take some of the sort of heat out of consent numbers. And yet we've still got the supply, undersupply issue fundamentally sitting around underneath some of the numbers, particularly in some of those regions that we mentioned. So, yeah, there's real problems to unpick in the housing market, and the government has a big, as I said, it has a big role to play, both in terms of the sort of straight supply of state houses, but also in terms of trying to undo some of the issues that have led to where we are.
Absolutely, and look, I think, I mean, this really is the defining issue of New Zealand's generation at the moment. And if we don't make a change soon, it will be, the defining issue, sort of in perpetuity. So we'll continue to monitor that one, and we may well do another update when we see some of the new social housing register numbers and similar, just to sort of tease out a little bit more where those changes and challenges are emerging. Thanks, Gareth. Always great to chat. I'll catch you and everyone else on the next edition of Econ Talks.